fighting maniac lives by one creed: always challenge someone stronger. From the moment Allahan first stepped into the ring, every match ended with him knocking out his opponent. Until one day, he suddenly transmigrated into a game world with an extremely high difficulty level. In this world, knights and mages belong to two factions that are completely incompatible. The body he took over belonged to the young master of the strongest mage family. But because he was born without magic, he was abandoned in a prison governed by knights. Yet when the warden incited the inmates to attack him, he took all of them down with nothing but his bare hands. That sensation instantly awakened his desire to challenge the strong once more. After all, in his previous life, he was known as Jin Jinho, the undefeated legend of the fighting world. Even in his 40s, facing young and powerful championship contenders, he still had absolute confidence he would never lose. In his recent matches, he deliberately avoided using his legs. This led the public to believe he had suffered a leg injury. So at the start of the match, his opponent pretended to go for a grapple. But the real plan was to cripple his leg permanently. Just when the opponent thought the plan was about to succeed, the next second he was knocked down by Allahan's spinning kick. The referee rushed in to check his condition and announced Allahan's victory. Now, they should finally understand why he rarely used his legs. After the match, he changed into his casual clothes. He asked his coach to handle the press conference while he left on his own. He also told the coach to inform him once the next match was confirmed. Helpless against such an unreasonable request, the coach agreed and reminded him to take a ride home because it was pouring outside. But Allahan simply said it was perfect, the cool weather would feel great, and that he would run home instead. The coach was stunned, but when he looked up, the door had already closed. He ran out to warn Allahan that it was 30 kilometers to his house, but was immediately surrounded by reporters asking when the press conference would start and whether the rumor about Allahan's leg injury was staged. The coach, who had accompanied Allahan for many years, understood him deeply and felt guilty for him, because ever since Allahan debuted, he had never encountered an evenly matched opponent. He was a world champion with a 100% KO rate. Regarding Allahan's supposed leg injury, the coach told reporters there was no such thing. Jin Jinho had imposed that restriction on himself. As a world champion, he naturally earned a fortune and lived on the top floor of the most expensive building in H country. Soon after, he actually finished running the entire 30 kilometers and returned home. When the elevator doors opened, Ryu was standing at the doorway as usual. Allahan walked straight into his home, completely used to this sight. He quickly finished his shower, then sat down in front of his computer. His eyes lit up as he stared at the screen, because the game he was looking at was The Last Savior. It had been online for 10 years, a high-difficulty game even players in H country had given up on. But for the past 10 years, he had played it every single day, constantly training and pushing himself, because his life goal had always been to fight stronger opponents. Yet in reality, that goal had faded long ago. But here, he could feel the thrill of being a challenger again. Just when he thought he wouldn't clear the stage today either, he saw the final boss's HP bar drop to nearly 0. At this rate, he was about to win, but he didn't really want the game to end so quickly. He silently cheered for the Demon King in his heart. Every move the Demon King made was easily parried by him. He couldn't understand why the boss's movements were so monotonous today. Every one of his attacks landed effortlessly. Even though he kept shouting "come on" at the screen, his hands never stopped performing flashy operations. Finally, Allahan caught the Demon King's opening and began charging his ultimate attack. His chi burst forth, forming the shape of a blue lion. The next second, he delivered the finishing blow. With a chime, the system notified him that the challenge was successful. At that moment, he became a champion in 2 worlds. After exiting the game, he closed his eyes and pondered quietly. Suddenly, he slammed the mouse against the screen, because now he had no idea whom he could fight next. Was he supposed to challenge a brown bear? Just then, a golden bolt of lightning lit up the sky. He quickly turned to see what was happening. The golden lightning seemed to have eyes and came striking straight toward him. When he opened his eyes again, Rain was pouring from the sky. The surroundings were noisy, and he had no idea why he was outside. At that moment, someone patted his shoulder and said, "Number 218, this isn't the time to be spacing out. Hurry up and get out of here. I've been calling you. What are you doing?" He was confused about who this person was and where exactly he was. Then he noticed the number 172 printed on the man's shirt. Not far away, a group of people wearing the same uniform were running toward a large gate, and the emblem on the wall's flag looked strangely familiar to him. Number 172 kept shaking him, saying, "Get it together. Do you want to be locked up here forever? Today might be our last chance." It was the last chance to escape from this disgusting place called Kelowin. The moment Allahan heard the word Kelowin, his eyes widened. Even though number 172 was dragging him by the collar, he was still lost in thought. He wondered if he was dreaming, but everything felt far too real, definitely not a dream. Could it be he had actually entered the game he used to play, and as a prisoner, no less? While being pulled forward by number 172, something suddenly occurred to him. He stopped instantly and told the man to wait. He asked if he didn't find it strange. If this really was Kelowin, the security would never be this lax. Number 172 explained it was because Warden Clark wasn't here. He had rushed out earlier, so now was their chance. But Allahan grabbed him by the back of his collar instead and pulled him the opposite way, ignoring his panicked yelling. If what number 172 said was true, Allahan could understand the plan. But his instincts as a world champion were telling him he absolutely must not go through that door. Since number 172 had tried to take him along instead of running alone, Allahan decided he might as well save his life in return, even if he didn't know how this man was related to the body's original owner. At that moment, the gate finally opened. The prisoners, as if seeing freedom, desperately charged forward. But suddenly, an arm flew through the air. The man at the front collapsed to his knees, clutching his severed limb. And standing before him was Warden Clark himself. With a look of contempt, the warden ordered his men to kill all these filthy insects. The soldiers behind the warden launched their attack instantly. The massacre of all the prisoners who had tried to escape began. Number 172 still didn't understand why the warden was there, but Allahan told him it was a trap and ordered him to shut up and run. After a long while, the slaughter finally ended. The warden ordered the remaining prisoners to gather. Thanks to his champion's intuition, both Allahan and number 172 survived by sheer luck. Number 172 couldn't help lowering his head, staring at the corpses on the ground. A wave of nausea surged up his throat. He finally bent over and vomited. At that moment, a guard walked up to him. The guard kicked him hard and said, "Didn't I tell you not to move?" Judging by the situation, they wouldn't spare even children. With this atmosphere, another massacre could break out at any moment. If that happened, Allahan would have to fight as well. Then the warden stood before Allahan and said he was lucky. He added that Allahan probably didn't even have the courage to run. After all, mages were cowards, and fighting them was disgraceful. Leaning close, he continued, "You'll regret not dying today, Allahan." With that, the warden turned and walked away. Allahan lowered his head and saw his reflection in the puddle, so his name was Allahan. A week passed quickly in the prison. There was only one task here, stacking stone towers. It was meaningless labor meant solely to torment prisoners. During this time, he also began to understand the body he now inhabited. First, the body was extremely weak, about 15 years old, and lifting even one of those stones left him breathless. Second, when he secretly tried using magic at night, he achieved nothing at all. This confused him greatly. As the heir of the strongest mage family, how could Allahan be unable to use magic? At that moment, Allahan finally realized why he had been thrown into this place. Of course, the Allahan family had more than enough power to do something like this. Then a guard ordered him to move the stone tower to the other side. The guard sat not far behind him, supervising his work. But honestly, how long was this supposed to continue? Dinner time arrived soon after. Ever since he came here, he trained his body every day, yet the food was always this miserable. Number 172 came over with his tray and asked if Allahan wasn't eating bread again today. Allahan handed his bread to him. Bread was low-grade carbs, so he almost never ate it. Number 172 devoured it immediately. All the other prisoners avoided Allahan, but this kid was different. The symbol of the strongest mage family, Allahan, was his pair of red eyes. Rumor said those eyes were cursed from killing too many people, and anyone who met that gaze would die soon after. Allahan and number 172 were about the same age and even roommates. Though he lost the original memories, he felt they had been close. But how could a boy this young end up in Kelowin prison? At that moment, number 172 warned him to be more careful lately. When Allahan asked why, number 172 explained that because he worked too seriously, everyone else's workload increased, and the other prisoners were now resentful of him. He added that Allahan should especially watch out for number 589, a notorious fighter in the arena who was imprisoned for killing someone outside. Hearing that, Allahan asked, "Then you sticking around me, won't that put you in danger?" Number 172 replied, "Well, we've known each other for a while. I can't just pretend we're strangers." Just then, Allahan sensed something wrong. He stood up and said in a low voice, "Fine, but you might get in the way. Go somewhere else for now." Heavy footsteps approached, full of hostility. He turned around and told number 172, "Looks like what you were worried about is happening." Number 172's face suddenly turned pale. He had clearly seen the leader's number. A group of underlings stood behind number. Wearing a vicious expression, 589 said, "Hey, Allahan, I heard everyone's workload increased because of you." Just as Allahan replied with disdain, saying he was only treating it as exercise. A massive fist flew straight toward him. The next moment, he was slammed to the ground by number. Number 172 froze in terror and asked if he was okay. At that moment, Allahan suddenly grabbed 589's collar. 589 clearly didn't expect him to still have the strength to fight back. Allahan wrapped his arms around 589's head, leaped into the air, and struck him with a fierce knee to the face. Number 172 and 589's underlings were shocked by the scene. But then Allahan's eyes widened as well. His shock came from realizing that his attack had absolutely no effect on number. He couldn't help complaining about how useless this body was. Number 589 grabbed him by the collar and lifted him into the air. Then he violently threw him across the ground. Everyone thought Allahan was going to die that day. But suddenly, a voice rang in his mind. Notification, data synchronization progress 100%. Synchronization complete. Hearing it, the corner of his mouth lifted into a subtle, cold smile. Allahan slowly stood up, a blue aura wrapping around his entire body. The muscles on his arms and legs visibly thickened. A surge of overwhelming power burst out instantly. He clenched his fists, getting familiar with a new strength. Then he raised both hands, entering a fighting stance. With a light grin, he told number 589 to try again. Seeing him provoke so boldly, 589 let out a snort of laughter. Clenching his fists until they cracked, he said with disdain, "Even your own family didn't want you. Where does a discarded young master get this confidence?" Allahan told him to stop talking nonsense and asked if he was scared. "As you wish, I'll kill you." 589 roared as he charged forward. Allahan seized the timing and kicked at his thigh. But 589 predicted the move and caught his leg tightly. Just as he was about to mock Allahan, Allahan spun and delivered a roundhouse kick, breaking free and striking 589's head hard. 589 clutched his head, staggering violently. Allahan gave him no chance to breathe and kicked upward, striking his chin. Number 589 instantly lost consciousness and began to collapse. Allahan followed with another kick straight to his face. 589 finally collapsed completely. "I wasn't planning on using my legs, but we're not in the same weight class. Using only fists is a bit troublesome." Seeing their boss defeated, 589's underlings became frantic and drew their weapons, charging at Allahan. But Allahan walked toward the fallen 589 without any hurry. Then he stepped on him, as if preparing to break his wrist. He threatened number 589's underlings. Take one more step and 589 will spend his next life being spoon-fed. He then ordered them to bring a guard. The group simply froze in place, glaring at him viciously. Seeing no reaction, he added more pressure. Do I look like I'm joking? If you don't believe me, should I break one of his arms first? At last, one underling panicked and ran off to find a guard. A few others carried number 589 away, threatening that next time they would definitely not spare him. After returning to the cell to rest, number 172 looked at him with admiration and asked when he had learned those moves. Then he suddenly changed the subject and said, "Wait, were you always this tall? I remember we were about the same height." Allahan brushed it off. Work hard stacking stones and you'll grow taller. In truth, the data synchronization brought his real-world stats into the game. But even so, this body was still just a child. At that moment, a status window appeared before him. He had been wanting to check his stats since earlier. Name, Jade Allahan. Class, Mage. Growth rate decreased. Penalty activated. Mana, 0. Seeing this, he frowned. Is this right? Mana, 0? Internally, he kept ranting. Seriously? A mage? An Allahan? And they stick me with these garbage stats? Even though he restarted the status window in disbelief, the result remained the same. Mana was still 0. At that moment, number 172 asked what he was doing, and Allahan covered his embarrassment with loud laughter. After accepting reality, he lay on his bed and sorted through his thoughts. He finally understood why a half-baked failure like this body would be abandoned by the family. The Allahan family would absolutely do something like that. Now, he could only calm down and confirm things slowly. Still, strength, agility, stamina, and perception were all maxed at 110, which was fortunate in its own way. Although the reduced growth rate came with penalties, this skinny, underdeveloped body couldn't display full stat potential anyway. That penalty should be fixable once he trained the body properly. But the food here was truly awful. Still, he had a bunch of traits he had never seen before, and all of them were S rank. From what he knew, poison immunity and undying fighter were traits he unlocked through gameplay. If his mana weren't 0, this would basically be an overpowered character. But this setup was clearly designed to piss him off. After sorting out the situation, he sat up. He would figure out the rest later. There had to be a way to solve the mana problem too. Just then, a guard shouted, "Numbers called, step outside." Prisoners began being called one by one and left their cells. They lined up quietly in a single file. Allahan asked number 172 what's happening to them. He answered, "Those are death row inmates. They're being taken for their last meal." Allahan wasn't familiar with last meal, so 172 explained before execution they can request whatever food they want. Hearing that, Allahan's mind lit up. He instantly formed a plan. Allahan asked the boy for his name. The boy folded his arms and said they had always addressed each other by numbers, so they had long forgotten real names. He then introduced himself as Ryu, a street kid without any family, and asked Allahan for his name in return. Allahan replied that he was Jade Allahan, then asked whether Ryu wanted to leave this place. Ryu answered of course. He never planned to stay here forever, and he had his own reasons to get out. Hearing this, Allahan asked if he had ever thought about how to escape. Ryu thought for a moment and said that the only exit was the front gate, and the key to that gate was with the warden. Allahan asked, "So we have to defeat the warden first and steal the key?" But Ryu shot back, asking if he was joking, and reminded him that the warden, even retired, was still a 5-ring knight. In Allahan's inherited memories, Warden Clark was a knight who despised mages to the extreme. In the world of the Last Savior, knights and mages had always been natural enemies. But Allahan wasn't confident he could beat a retired 5-ring knight, so he said there seemed to be no other way. At that moment, Ryu said stealing was enough. He explained that people raised on the streets learned how to pickpockets before they learned how to greet others. However, the warden was always accompanied by guards, making it hard to find an opening. Hearing this, Allahan's lips curved into a faint smile. He already had an idea of how they could escape. The next morning during assembly, The guard announced that the work quota would increase again starting today. The prisoners immediately complained, but the guard coldly asked whether they intended to disobey the warden's orders. One prisoner was about to protest further when a sharp blade touched his throat. The guard said he was merely delivering orders, and if anyone had complaints, they could go speak to the warden themselves. The prisoner trembled and asked whether this wasn't too much and what the reason was. The guard's eyes shifted slightly. Then he said, "You still don't know whose fault this is?" The prisoners knew exactly whom he meant, and all turned to stare at Alahan. At that moment, the guard let out a soft cough. He turned around and walked away, saying he would grab a smoke and come back. Ryu approached Alahan nervously, whispering that something felt wrong, but Alahan simply told him to stay further back. Alahan thought to himself, the warden probably couldn't act openly, so he incited a riot, hoping the other inmates would kill him. Yesterday's incident might have been arranged by him as well. An honored knight, using such filthy tactics. And now even the guard was siding with the inmates. This situation could no longer be handled like yesterday. Ryu could only hope that nothing would happen to Alahan. The inmates seemed to have reached a consensus and began closing in on him. Alahan remained relaxed and even said, "I get where you're coming from, but this really can't be avoided." His words completely enraged them. They swung their fists and charged at him like a crashing wave. In the next instant, Alahan leapt into the air and drove a fierce knee strike into the inmate at the front. The man was sent flying backward, slowing the rush of the others. But the remaining inmates immediately swarmed and surrounded him. Alahan raised his fists and grinned. "Perfect. I've been needing somewhere to blow off some steam. Come at me, all of you." In a flash, the inmates attacked from every direction. Alahan recalled how, during cage fights, he always felt dealing with opponents one by one was too troublesome. He preferred facing them all at once. So he had longed for a situation exactly like this, one against many. He commented casually, "You guys could stand to be a little more aggressive." Just then, the corner of his eye caught sudden movement. He ducked instantly, narrowly avoiding the blow from an attacker behind him. He struck backward with an elbow, smashing it into the attacker's chin. Then he slipped into the crowd like lightning. Wherever his fists and kicks landed, inmates dropped to the ground, crying out in pain. Ryu watched from not far away, witnessing a completely one-sided massacre. He was stunned, unable to believe the person he had lived with every day was this overwhelmingly strong. At that moment, number 589 appeared behind Ryu, grabbed him, and ordered him to come along. But Alahan had no idea what was happening to Ryu. He was fully immersed in the fight. Seeing how fierce he was, the remaining inmates pulled out knives. But he showed no fear at all. To him, the thrill of dodging attacks, the rush of landing a clean hit, that was exactly why he had fallen in love with combat sports. Inside, he roared with excitement. More! More! Come on! But then, someone behind him called out, "Hey, Alahan, stop acting tough. Just go die quietly. You should take better care of your friends." Behind that man, number 589 had Ryu tightly restrained. Seeing this, anger flared inside Alahan. Yet he only grinned. "Hey, you trash. You just made a very serious mistake." The man standing behind number 589 let out a creepy chuckle. "You should feel honored to fight me. I'm a second ring knight. And you, Aaron, someone without even mana, only have one ending, death." With that, he leaped into the air, sword raised to strike. I shifted to the side, dodging the blow. His attack hit nothing but air. But when he lifted his head, he saw that I had already knocked number 589 to the ground and rescued Ryu. His voice trembled. "Impossible. What did you just do? You can't even use magic." I answered casually, "This isn't magic." Before the words fully landed, my figure blurred as I shot across the open space like a ghost. In a blink, I was already in front of him. My right leg carved a sharp arc through the air and slammed into his neck. The man was sent flying several meters back. At that moment, the warden stepped through the door behind me. Our eyes met in the air, tension instantly exploding. He demanded that I explain what happened. Then Ryu's voice echoed, "Wait." Running toward us, Ryu shouted, 218 is the victim. They took me hostage to kill him. It was self-defense. Hearing this, the warden's brows tightened. He cast a disgusted glance at the fallen inmates, silently cursing them as idiots. Suddenly, he asked if I had opened my mana channels. I brushed it off. How would I know? At that moment, a violet aura surged from the warden's body. All the inmates collapsed to their knees under the pressure, trembling uncontrollably. But Ryu was still just a kid, and he collapsed flat onto the ground. Yet blue energy flared around him again, completely unaffected by the warden, a 5-ring knight's pressure. Then a system window appeared before him. S-rank trait, noble soul of the champion, is resisting suppression. He grinned, thinking, asterisk, so it's a mental type immunity? This ability is totally unfair, asterisk. In his original world, his body had already reached its peak. There was no way he would be suppressed by a mere 5-ring nobody. The warden was utterly stunned. He hadn't expected him to stand there completely fine, especially someone who hadn't even awakened mana. The warden took a deep breath. A moment later, an even more overwhelming aura burst from his body. Yet he still stood there unharmed. He thought, asterisk, this is an S-rank trait. What else can you do? Asterisk. His reaction exceeded the warden's expectations, leaving the man frozen in place. The guard behind him finally couldn't endure it and begged him to stop. The warden had no choice but to withdraw his aura. He curled his lips into a smirk, thinking, asterisk, good thing he stopped here. If he had gotten mad and started swinging his sword, I might have been done for, asterisk. The warden glared at him like he wanted to tear him apart alive. In the end, he could only order them to resume work before turning to leave with a dark expression. But he called out to the warden, saying he had something to say. The warden turned back angrily, asking what he wanted. He explained he was sick of stacking rocks and constantly on edge worrying about attacks from other inmates. So, I've decided to go die. Ryu broke into a cold sweat when he heard that and hurriedly asked what Allahan was talking about. But Allahan ignored him and continued. Like I said, I'm going to become a death row inmate. The warden asked in disbelief. You understand what those words mean, right? If you change your mind later, I will never forgive you. Allahan tilted his chin indifferently. Afraid I'll regret it? Want to record it with a crystal orb? The warden's eyes lit up instantly. This was exactly what he wanted. He immediately turned and ordered his men to bring the crystal orb. Allahan continued calmly. I heard the last meal lets you eat whatever you want. Then I'll decide now. My final meal will be Bella State beef, and I want to eat until my stomach bursts. The guards behind the warden all showed shocked expressions. One muttered, how could something that expensive be served to a death row inmate? Bella State beef was one of the rarest foods in The Last Savior. It tasted so good that descriptions like strength wells up after eating it, or this fight can definitely be won now, often appeared, and some quests even had players bribing NPCs with it. Hands on his hips, Allahan said, I'm paying with my life. This isn't too much to ask, right? But I want the S-rank one. If you pull any tricks, everything is void. Ryu spoke again. You're really accepting the death penalty? Only then did Allahan remember him. He pointed at Ryu. He's coming too. Prepare enough for the two of us to eat until we die. The warden ordered his men to carry out the request, saying that since Allahan was going to die anyway, they might as well agree. Cold sweat poured down Ryu's face as he stammered, what about my opinion? And so, a world where only Ryu got hurt was achieved. During the following days, Allahan didn't work at all. He just ate the guard rations they provided and focused on training. Meanwhile, Ryu was completely baffled as to why Allahan kept exercising despite being sentenced to die. But the real reason Allahan chose this path was because The Last Savior had a special system. When a stat reached its maximum value of 100, any new experience would automatically overflow into the remaining stats. And since all of his stats, except mana, were already at 100, it meant that every bit of experience he earned here would pour straight into mana. Just then, a guard arrived and called Allahan and Ryu out. Allahan's face lit up with joy, while Ryu held his head and wailed miserably. A full feast of Bella State beef was already laid out on the table. The sizzling steaks gleamed with an irresistible shine. Ryu devoured the food with tears streaming down his face. It's so good. I've never eaten anything this delicious in my life. Allahan reminded him not to forget who made this possible. But to Allahan, the beef special effects mattered far more than its taste. At that moment, system pop-ups appeared repeatedly, informing him that part of his penalty was being reduced. He could feel it clearly. The experience that had been blocked for days was now flooding in all at once. The first goal is complete. Next is that one. Meanwhile, a guard reported to the warden that the final meal had begun, and the warden ordered that no one be allowed near them. After speaking, the warden fell into deep thought, unable to figure out what had happened. That day, his expression didn't look like he was enduring anything. It was more like he couldn't be suppressed at all. Even though he was retired, the warden was still a five-ring knight, and he refused to believe a young mage with unopened mana could withstand his aura. He glanced down at the bracelet on his wrist and swore he would return the humiliation to Allahan tenfold. Before long, Allahan and Ryu had completely wiped out the entire plate of Bell Estate beef. Ryu burped and said, "Now I can die with no regrets." Allahan chuckled. "Now is exactly when you can't die." He clenched his fists. After eating to the brim, he felt overflowing energy. "I really want to test this strength right now." At that moment, the door swung open. They both turned their heads at the same time. It was the warden. Allahan said, "What? We already ate everything." The warden walked toward them step by step. "Number 218, Allahan." Allahan smirked. "What's wrong? Angry we didn't save you any?" The warden glared at him. In his eyes, Allahan was a brat relying on his bloodline to act arrogant. He reached out and grabbed Allahan's shoulder. Then he spoke coldly. "I'll make sure that annoying face of yours suffers." He targeted Allahan not just because he was a mage, but because he was an Allahan. The Allahan lineage was among the strongest mage families, and the warden wanted classified information from him. If valuable enough, it could free him from this remote prison. Allahan finally noticed something wrong. The warden was wearing a magic tool. The next second, Clark unleashed his aura again, pressing down on him. With full confidence, he said, "Let's see you handle it this time," only to find Allahan smiling calmly, unaffected. Ryu staggered toward the warden, but the warden smacked him to the ground with a single slap. Having overeaten, Ryu collapsed and began vomiting. He told the warden that stopping now would be enough. But the warden refused to give up and raised his other hand. He pressed both hands on Allahan's shoulders, increasing the pressure. Allahan finally lost patience with the constant harassment, swatting the warden's hand away. "I already told you to knock it off. If you want to kill me, then execute the death sentence properly. Stop fooling around like this." The warden froze, unable to understand how even with a magic tool, he still couldn't suppress Allahan, who hadn't even opened his mana. He began to suspect Allahan might be at least one ring higher than him, but he couldn't accept it, insisting the strength must come from Allahan's bloodline. After all, reaching 5 rings was something he had trained for his entire life. Yet he still couldn't force this young mage to kneel. Then Allahan asked casually, "Are you done with your tricks?" The warden lowered his head and thought in silence. Finally, he turned to leave and warned, "Your execution is tomorrow morning. Even an Allahan cannot defy the laws of His Majesty the Emperor. Enjoy your final night." Later, Warden Clark sat writing everything that had happened into his notebook. Although he couldn't fully understand the phenomenon, he believed it might be valuable information for active knights. Suddenly, a wave of exhaustion hit him. He had pushed his mana to the limit and used a magic tool, leaving his body completely drained. He collapsed and fell asleep on the spot. The scene cut back to Allahan and Ryu's cell. Ryu finally opened his eyes. After taking the full brunt of a warden empowered by a magic tool, his young body simply couldn't endure. Allahan asked how he felt. Ryu said he still felt nauseous, as if he could throw up any moment. Allahan praised his handiwork. Ryu grinned, proudly pulling out the key he had stolen from the warden's sleeve. Allahan told him he'd done well. After all, for an ordinary person, doing something that dangerous took guts. The kid was a real man. Ryo sat up, saying he only managed to steal the key because the warden's attention was fully on him. Then Ryo worriedly asked if he was okay. He replied, "Yeah, I'm fine." Ryo suddenly shifted the topic, saying he was strange and must be hiding something he didn't know. He told Ryo to go move more stones. After that, he looked forward. At this moment, his strength, agility, and stamina had each increased by 10 points. It was an astonishing result. Just as the rumor said, the meat wasn't only delicious, but highly nutritious. And since he had kept training, he could clearly feel the qualitative improvement in his body after eating Bella State beef. Clearing all penalties quickly would still be difficult. Even so, he made up his mind and told Ryo, "We're leaving tonight. Once you recover, we'll depart." Ryo asked whether they shouldn't escape immediately, since the warden might notice soon. He confidently told him not to worry. The warden was definitely asleep by now. Ryo asked how he knew. He explained because that bracelet the warden uses boosts mana instantly, but it builds up massive fatigue. It's a trash artifact. He's probably passed out somewhere already. The warden even brought the dining room key himself and unexpectedly used a magical device. Thanks to that, his plan went even more smoothly. He said it was almost time to leave. Ryo still hesitated, but he said Ryo could stay behind if he was afraid. Ryo trembled and said, "You're my lifeline. Of course I'm going with you." Ryo then asked, "We don't have the key for this room. What do we do?" He motioned for Ryo to step back. Then he kicked the cell door open in one strike. Ryo was shocked by his strength and asked, "Are you really a mage?" Suddenly, two guards nearby were drawn by the noise and demanded to know what he was doing. He scoffed, saying, "What else? Obviously, we're escaping." Then he and Ryo sprinted away. Ryo reminded him to look ahead. A group of guards was standing at the main gate. He burst forward, shouting over his shoulder, "Don't stop, just keep running." One guard rushed in first, sword raised. At the moment they crossed paths, the guard swung down. He easily twisted his body to dodge it. Then he grabbed the guard's face with one hand and hurled him away with force. The guard crashed into the group ahead, slowing all of them down. The leading guard froze, stunned, his face filled with rage and disbelief. But he was already right in front of him, palm raised. He struck him straight in the throat. The guard's veins bulged instantly as he let out a choked, "Ah," unable to speak. But he didn't stop. He slipped past the guard immediately, then charged toward the guards behind him. Those guards, already shaken by his strength, didn't dare fight back. He vaulted like a hurdler, kicking the guard he had thrown earlier. As he landed, he dropped low to dodge another guard's attack. Then a backward hook kick struck that guard square in the head. He landed steadily at last. Another guard came at him with a raised sword. He dodged again with ease. Planting one hand on the ground, he spun into a sharp roundhouse kick that slammed into the guard's head, then leaped up and smashed the guard fully into the floor. He glanced back. Two guards were charging with swords raised. Instead of fear, excitement flashed across his face. He grinned. In an instant, his leg whipped up and struck both guards at once with lightning speed. Ryo, following behind him, was stunned by what he had just witnessed. By the time the warden was shaken awake by the guards, all he saw was a field of injured men, while the two of them had already escaped through the main gate. Furious, his eyes widened with rage, and he immediately ordered his men to capture them as fast as possible. Meanwhile, in the nearby village of Moda, a small eye peeked through the gap of an unremarkable wooden barrel, scanning the surroundings. After confirming they had shaken off the pursuing guards, he and Ryo lifted the lid and poked their heads out. He asked Ryo where they were. Ryo explained it was a small village called Moda, the only settlement near the prison. He then asked, "Won't the guards come here first?" Ryo replied, "We can't help it. The city is too far. As long as we blend in with the crowd, we should be safe." He said he would follow Ryo's lead, then asked what Ryo was searching for. Ryo pulled out some clothes from the barrel and said, "These fit you perfectly. Put them on." He frowned and asked, "Do you really have to pick something that makes me look like a beggar?" Ryo explained, "There are beggars everywhere here. It's the safest disguise." After the disguise was complete, Ryo told him to stay put while he went to fetch some things. He asked, "Do you even have money? How are you getting anything?" Ryo smirked proudly and said, "Why would I need money?" He thought to himself that this kid's way of thinking was definitely different from others. Ryo reminded him once more not to wander off, saying he would be back soon, adding that he was his companion after all. Allahan fell silent. He truly wasn't sure whether Ryu was someone he could trust. An hour later, Ryu finally returned. Allahan asked what he had brought. Ryu took out a color-changing lens and placed it on him. Their crimson pupils shifted to blue, functioning like cosmetic contacts. Ryu explained that red pupils were the signature of the Allahan family, and far too conspicuous. They had to hide them. In the south, however, this was Bahar territory, and blue was the most popular color. Among those pompous nobles, even eye color was considered decoration. Hearing this, Allahan fell into deep thought. He knew the Bahar family extremely well. His main game character had been Torres Bahar, and he completed the final ending using that character. Mages belonged to Allahan, sword masters to Bahar. In this world where the two lineages despised each other, even eye color was a symbol of division. Ryu then led him to a resting spot he had secured on the way back. Lying in a horse stable, Allahan kept questioning his situation. How did things become like this? One moment he opened his eyes and found himself inside the game. And not only that, he was a prisoner. Now he was sleeping in a stable, and he still didn't understand why Ryu insisted on following him. Ryu called him a companion, yet the warden's target was clearly him. Staying close only meant danger. Still, Ryu was a street-born pickpocket, quick-handed and useful, and Allahan needed that assistance right now. That was why he chose to stay with him. But even so, he wasn't sure whether he could truly trust him. At the same time, Ryu lay awake as well, lost in his own thoughts. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the cracks of the stable, waking Allahan. Last night had been too dark to see clearly, and Allahan never expected he'd end up sleeping in such a filthy, foul-smelling place. Ryu sat up as well, stretching lazily, saying that Allahan really lived up to being a noble elite. Was he uncomfortable in a place like this? Allahan replied that no one would like staying somewhere like this. Ryu agreed, saying everyone was just compromising with reality. Allahan stood up and said that wouldn't do. He needed to earn money first. At the very least, he had to fill his stomach. Ryu asked how he planned to make money. Avoiding the guard's eyes was already hard enough. He even suggested Allahan learn to be a pickpocket. Allahan confidently refused and told Ryu to help him find a place. Ryu looked confused and asked where, and Allahan answered, the arena. Ryu quickly found out where the underground arena was. At that moment, two burly men were fighting fiercely on the stage. The crowd below roared wildly, cheering them on. Ryu was so frightened by the scene that cold sweat ran down his back. He asked if Allahan had come to the wrong place. Allahan firmly said no, this was exactly the place. The dark-skinned fighter bit down on the long-haired man's trapezius muscle. But the long-haired man countered with a brutal punch. The dark-skinned man quickly adjusted and charged in again, only to be struck in the waist by another heavy punch. Allahan had originally thought this place would just have random street brawlers, but the level was actually pretty decent. Ryu, on the other hand, only wanted to leave as soon as possible. The long-haired man launched another attack. A straight punch slammed toward the dark-skinned fighter's face. Before the dark-skinned man could catch his breath, a barrage of punches poured down on him like cannon fire. Ryu was about to tell Allahan they should leave. ICA's was much stronger than the prisoners in Carowin. But when he turned around, Allahan was nowhere to be seen. The entire audience was shocked speechless by what happened next. Because Allahan had casually stopped Ikaza's punch with just one hand, despite clearly not being in the same weight class. Allahan told ICA's that he hadn't noticed the dark-skinned man had already passed out and that he shouldn't go overboard. ICA's was completely stunned, unable to figure out who dared speak to him like that. And Ryu was frozen in disbelief, wondering why that lunatic Allahan had jumped onto the stage. Allahan turned to the referee and asked if he'd taken a bribe. The outcome was already clear. Why was the match still continuing? Didn't that break the rules? At that moment, ICAs forcefully shook off his hand. He asked what Allahan was trying to do, secretly worried that if this boy was actually a noble, things could get troublesome. But Allahan instead asked, "Can't you tell?" The entire arena went silent. Every gaze locked onto Allahan, waiting for his answer. Allahan explained that he was just a beggar from the streets. The next second, he was drowned under a tidal wave of curses from the crowd. Yet he didn't care at all, saying he would take responsibility. He would fight that guy himself. Was that acceptable? He told everyone to look forward to it. He'd show them an interesting match. Just then, Ryu came rushing over in a panic. He fired off words like rapid fire, begging Allahan not to fight ICAs, saying ICAs was the strongest here and he absolutely didn't believe Allahan could win. Allahan's head throbbed from the nagging, and he scratched his head while ordering Ryu to bet all their belongings on his victory. Ryu was about to continue persuading him when Allahan cut him off. "Ryu, after this, we're buying beef, enough to eat until we burst." The match soon began, but not a single spectator supported Allahan. ICAs also concluded inwardly that this beggar was insane beyond saving. But then he suddenly sensed something different. The boy, though only about 15, had eyes that showed no trace of immaturity. His breathing was unusually calm and steady. What stood out the most was that Allahan's stance was completely different from anyone else's, aggressive yet steady, without a single opening. ICAs suddenly felt a wave of tension. Was he actually afraid of Beggar? Shame and anger flared in him, and he lunged forward, attacking Allahan first. But in the next second, Allahan's fist had already struck his cheek. Blood trickled from Ikaz's nose as he stared in disbelief. Allahan kept his fighting stance, muttering to himself that one shouldn't pull their hand back to the shoulder when punching. A punch should be thrown from a guard position, aimed straight at the opponent, taking the shortest, quickest path, light, clean, and direct. Then follow up quickly, occasionally adding a heavier strike with body weight. ICAs was blasted backward, flying across the stage. Blood and teeth flew out of his mouth. In the stands, Ryu, who had been silently praying for Allahan, slowly opened his eyes at the sound of the crowd's gasps. He saw ICAs covered in wounds, barely able to stand, while Allahan remained completely unscathed, moving with ease. Ryu was stunned speechless. He had never imagined Allahan could truly defeat ICAs. By now, Ikaz's vision was beginning to blur. Everything in front of him turned hazy. He had never once imagined he would lose to a kid. He threw a desperate punch with all his strength, but Allahan easily ducked under it. He couldn't understand. Why couldn't he evade those seemingly messy punches? It was inevitable. After all, they came from two different worlds. Finally, Allahan drove a punch straight into his chest. ICAs was sent flying once more. This time, he would never get up again. Allahan looked toward the referee and asked what he was waiting for. Did he want Allahan to ignore the rules as well? The referee's gaze drifted toward the edge of the arena, as if waiting for some kind of signal. After receiving it, he raised Allahan's hand and declared his victory. But Allahan felt no joy in winning. He hadn't even warmed up. Had he known, he would have held back a little more. After leaving the stage, he and Ryu went to the arena's finance office to collect the prize money, only to find the amount wrong. He directly asked the clerk whether they assumed young people couldn't do basic math. The clerk quickly waved his hands, insisting he had given them the full amount. But Allahan still felt something was off. There was no way it should be this little. Ryu, standing beside him, avoided eye contact, clearly guilty. When Allahan asked how much he had bet, he didn't expect the answer. Ryu hadn't bet everything. Ryu explained he didn't like gambling, and he needed to save money for dinner. As they were arguing, a woman interrupted them, with two tall bodyguards behind her. She said, coquettishly, that she only wanted to talk to Allahan. Allahan recognized her. She was the one the referee kept glancing at, so he asked who she was. Realizing he didn't know her, she figured this must be his first time here and introduced herself as Helena, the administrator of this arena. Just as she was about to ask again if they could talk, Alahan and Ryu walked away without hesitation. Ryu seemed to know the woman and glanced back. At that moment, her two bodyguards blocked Alahan's path. Alahan asked, completely unfazed, whether they also wanted to end up like the guy earlier. He could make them stay in bed for days. Yet they didn't move an inch. They were clearly loyal to the woman. Helena then spoke from behind, saying that the ICA's Alahan defeated today was a champion she had scouted from the metropolis. So he should already know why she wanted to talk to him. She told him she'd let him go for today, but they would definitely meet again. Next time they could talk more comfortably, since she liked strong people. Alahan stayed silent, uninterested in anything she said. After that, Alahan and Ryu went to a barbecue restaurant. Ryu was starving, but still reminded Alahan that he absolutely shouldn't upset that woman from earlier. Helena might appear to be just the arena administrator, but she was actually the hidden power of the city. As long as they stayed here, they would inevitably cross paths with her. Alahan said that in his eyes, she was just a fox before love. Ryu replied that yes, that was her nickname, the old fox. Alahan thought for a moment. It seemed clear she approached him with the intention of using him. It had been the same when he first entered the world of combat sports. Once he showed talent, many agencies contacted him, most wanting to use him as a tool to make money. He even ran into a few scams. After all, back then he was just a country boy full of dreams. He was lucky to meet his current agent, the one who built him into a champion. Thanks to him, Alahan was no longer a kid whom others could easily take advantage of. He was a champion who had fought countless battles to reach the top. Old fox. Then they would see who was more seasoned. At that moment, the waiter brought a single serving of Bell Estate beef. Ryu was about to dig in, but Alahan stopped him. He said it was fake. The color and marbling were completely off. But Ryu couldn't tell the difference. Alahan explained that thinking about it carefully, it was strange. The warden had taken an entire week to acquire it. If the neighboring city had it, it wouldn't have taken that long. And Bell Estate beef was extremely rare. There was no way they could serve it to so many customers. This looked more like first-grade wagyu beef, only one grade lower, but the quality gap was huge, and so was the price. But Ryu's stomach was already growling loudly, and he argued that food was food once it went into the stomach. Alahan responded that paying Bell Estate prices for fake beef was definitely unfair, and they didn't even have money. Reporting this was their consumer right. After saying that, Alahan waved the waiter over. The waiter, looking annoyed, said he had found them irritating from the start. Could they finish eating and leave? They only ordered one serving of meat, yet dared to take up space. Alahan said coldly that the meat was fake. They had ordered a single serving of Bell Estate beef, and the restaurant should bring out the real thing. He thought to himself that selling fake goods was already infuriating, and their attitude made it worse. But the waiter replied, asking if he knew where he was. This place didn't follow any street rules. Alahan no longer wanted to argue and told him to call the boss. The waiter then snarled, calling him a filthy beggar and asking if he had eaten leopard's gall to dare speak that way. Alahan scoffed and asked whether he wanted to see what a beggar who ate leopard's gall could do if he caused a scene here. Other customers turned their attention toward them, whispering among themselves. The waiter had no choice but to tell them to follow him. Soon, Alahan and Ryu were brought to the owner's office. The one in front was a pot-bellied middle-aged man, clearly the owner. Several knife-wielding thugs stood beside him. The owner asked if they were the two rude beggars. Alahan replied that the rude one was the owner. He sold them fake meat. The owner burst into laughter, saying the young man had spirit, but he should learn to read the room. As he spoke, he pointed at them repeatedly, seemingly ordering his men to attack. Alahan raised his fist and chuckled, saying he had no idea what reading the room meant, but seemed the ones confused about the situation were them. If they really fought, he asked who they thought would die. The thugs assumed he was bluffing and charged at him with their swords. But Alahan easily dealt with them all without any effort. Soon, the last thug was knocked down as well. The owner, who had been calm at first, was now drenched in cold sweat. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Ryu proudly said it served them right and asked if they knew who Alahan was the one who had defeated ICAs. The owner had heard a rumor earlier that ICAs had lost to a beggar, but he had laughed it off. Now he realized it was true and nervously asked what they wanted. Allahan replied calmly that they could finally have a proper conversation. He only wanted the compensation he deserved. He said he was a reasonable person, holding up 2 fingers. The compensation had 2 conditions. First, they would return his money. Second, from now on, whenever they ate beef here, the owner would pay for it, and at Bell Estate prices. The owner was stunned by Allahan's demands, wondering how someone could act like a bandit. Yet he had no choice but to agree. Later that night, they had earned quite a bit of money, so they decided to stay at a nicer inn. Ryu fell onto the soft bed. He waved his arms excitedly, saying it was his first time lying on a bed this soft. Then he turned toward Allahan and said, "Jade, you were amazing earlier. That consumer rights stuff really fits a noble." Allahan lay down as well and explained, "If word accidentally gets out, his restaurant is finished. For someone with no cards in hand, the negotiation table is pure hell." Ryu laughed, saying it was the first time he'd seen someone's face turn so red. He kept thanking Allahan, who simply told him to sleep. After a long while, the room became completely quiet. Ryu slowly opened his eyes. He sat up and whispered, asking if Allahan was asleep. Hearing no response, he confirmed Allahan was indeed sleeping. He tiptoed out of bed and quietly put on his clothes. Then he slowly approached the door, ready to leave. At that moment, Allahan opened his eyes, but he didn't get up to follow him. A few days later, at noon, Ryu, newly awake, said he was hungry and asked when they were going to eat. But Allahan hadn't rested at all since waking up. He had been exercising continuously. Ryu asked whether mages usually hated sweating. Was he training just because he had no magic? Allahan replied, "Yeah, something like that." After speaking, he looked forward and summoned the system, thinking that no matter how many times he checked his status each day, nothing changed. He was starting to wonder if he was cursed. Maybe it was because going from 0 to 1 meant creating something from nothing. That step naturally took time, and once the 1 appeared, things should go more smoothly. Of course, that was only what Allahan hoped. Seeing him dazed, Ryu asked with concern what was wrong. Allahan stood up and said his morning training was over. They should go eat. Ryu happily asked what they would have today. Allahan chuckled and said they'd have beef. It had been a while. Ryu's face lit up instantly. They hadn't had beef for 3 days. The reason was simple. Even shamelessness needed limits to avoid trouble. More importantly, they had eaten 10 servings on the first day, so money remained plentiful. Allahan lowered his head and asked how many gold coins they still had. Ryu said not many. The city's prices were extremely high. Allahan fell silent, thinking that after playing this game for 10 years, of course he understood the economy. Burning 50 gold coins in just a few days was basically throwing them on the ground. That kid seemed to think that because he was born a noble, he must know nothing about real life. Although Allahan didn't know what Ryu was hiding, he showed no signs of betrayal, so pretending not to notice was best. Soon, a subordinate pushed open the barbecue restaurant owner's office door, saying the 2 had arrived. The owner, Chiang Fu, was a man whose pride greatly exceeded his tolerance. He could not endure being humiliated by a brat. His expression turned vicious as he asked whether everything had been prepared as instructed. When Allahan and Ryu arrived at the private room, the table was already filled with beef dishes. Even the waiters treated them politely. After the waiter left, Allahan asked why everyone was being so friendly. Ryu didn't care and wondered if it was because they changed clothes, but Allahan still felt that wasn't enough of a reason. Allahan thought for a moment. He hadn't seen anyone resembling an assassin when they entered, and the restaurant interior looked no different from before. He couldn't figure out what they were planning. At that moment, Ryu asked whether he wasn't hungry and handed him a lettuce wrap he had just prepared. But the instant Allahan accepted the wrap, a thought flashed through his mind. He urgently told Ryu to spit it out. The meat couldn't be eaten.
Guys, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, please leave a comment in the comment section. Also subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Like the video and share it too. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.